Well, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensies. This is a podcast dedicated to exploring thoughts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. On today's episode, we're talking epistemology, and specifically religious epistemology, with my guest, Dr. Tyler McNabb. Dr. Tyler McNabb is an assistant professor at St. Joseph University, Macau. McNabb has authored Religious Epistemology, co-authored Plantingian Religious Epistemology and World Religions, and co-edited and contributed to Debating Christian Religious Epistemology, and that's a Bloomsbury Press book. McNabb has also authored and co-authored a dozen papers in journals such as Religious Studies, European Journal of Philosophy of Religion, and the Haythrop Journal. Tyler also has a podcast on YouTube called Furthering Christendom. Tyler, thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
Hey, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great that we can finally talk, kind of like face to face instead of just through ironic Facebook posts.
Yeah, that's right. So Tyler, this guy's a funny character because he's this well-respected philosopher, and he's also a millennial. And so this is a rare combination, at least right now. But I want to explain a funny thing that happened to me. So last semester, I'm in religious epistemology course here at TEDS with Dr. Harold Netland, and we're talking Great Pumpkin objection to Plantinga's epistemology, and whether any work's been done to argue against other religions. And Dr. Netland goes, yeah, there's some Plantingians in the field doing work on this. There's this guy Tyler McNabb, and he's working on that. And I chuckled to myself because to all these guys, this is this well-respected philosopher. To me, this is the guy who an hour before class I saw his Dragon Ball Z meme on Facebook. And so it's like, yes, it's the best of both worlds, and you're representing millennials well.
Well, that's very, very, very kind of you to say. And yes, I watched an episode yesterday as I was eating dinner. So
I love that. So I grew up, all my friends loved Dragon Ball Z. I didn't have cable. And so the only place I could find it was on the Spanish channel. So I got to watch Dragon Ball Zeta and try to interpret. I never actually learned Spanish from it, but so
it's so awesome, man. Like being a dad. So like my two boys, like I buy them Dragon Ball Z and Marvel toys, and like last night I went out and got them. They have Dragon Ball Z is quite big here in Macau.
Okay.
And so I went out and bought them this little like stadium for Dragon Ball Z characters to be placed on in their room and so forth, and get to watch it and experience it all over again with the kids. And it's just so awesome being a dad. So
yeah, man, that's huge.
Yeah,
I love that. So today's conversation has to do with epistemology, which is a theory of knowledge. And while epistemology can sound scary to the uninitiated, it kind of sounds esoteric, it actually has a lot of practical ramifications. And so to demonstrate this, I wanted to start with two practical questions for Tyler and have him answer yes or no, and then go over the deep philosophical underpinnings which led him to give those answers. Tyler, sound cool?
Sounds good.
All right. So can I know what I ate for breakfast this morning if I can't prove what I ate for breakfast this morning? What do you think?
Yes.
Yes. So, okay. And then can belief in God be rational without rational argumentation?
Yes.
All right. Boom. I know it's probably taking some restraint from him because he's a philosopher and he wants to demonstrate why. So let's do that. Let's get in. So initially here, what's epistemology?
All right. So epistemology, more formally, is like the study of knowledge. But even more broadly, it's the study of basically epistemic status. And so, whether a belief is what philosophers call justified or rational, right? Whether it's warranted, whether it constitutes knowledge. And so it's kind of, it explores these sorts of concepts. And so religious epistemology would be sort of applying these categories to specifically religious belief and practice. And
okay.
So, yeah.
So to follow up on religious epistemology. So I took, I've taken a lot of courses from Netland, and we were talking about philosophy of religion in one of the courses, and he teaches a lot of those. And someone goes, this seems like it's philosophy of Christian religion. And Netland was explaining it came out of Christianity, and now it's starting to move. You got Yandel, who worked in like Buddhism a little bit, and now it's starting to move in other religions. But historically, it's been like natural theology kind of stuff. Is that the same case for religious epistemology, that it started with Christians, and that's why it's focused, or not so much?
Yeah. So you're asking an analytic philosopher about history, and so no, I mean there's great religious traditions within Islam and Judaism and Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism, and you get epistemology in all of these categories as well. In fact, I think that there's a lot in common with Kant's epistemology, Immanuel Kant's epistemology, with a lot of Eastern religious traditions. So I actually think they beat Immanuel Kant to a lot of his points that we Westerners think that typically that's where that started. So yeah, I would say that in the 20th, 21st century, obviously, work done in religious epistemology is oftentimes done from a Judeo-Christian sort of standpoint.
Yeah.
There's some interesting philosophers coming up who have really interesting things to say and who aren't Christians. But I would say, in reference to the majority of the work done in the last, since the 20th, 21st century timeframe, would be those who are broadly within the Christian tradition, or at least atheists working primarily with in mind, sort of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Totally. Okay, that makes sense. All right, moving on here. So what's knowledge? What is knowledge?
All right. So I take knowledge. It's going to be how much you want me to get into this? How much? Do you want me to give like a really quick short answer?
Yeah,
or do you want me to explain?
quick short, because we're going to go in a little bit more later.
I take it to be warranted true belief. That's what I think knowledge is.
Okay. All right, and we're going to get into warrant and justification just in a second. So, so then, how about belief? What's belief?
For our purposes, we can understand belief as affirming a proposition. So, proposition, true or false statement. You're affirming whether something is true or not, and so that's what a belief is.
Yeah. Okay. It's so funny that everything is so specialized. So you can even go into that and say like true and false statements. You can be a deflationary, you can give a deflationary account, all this crazy stuff. So for our listeners, we're giving like just base level. There's lots of assumptions.
And there's epistemologists who will take, who will be against the sort of definition I just gave. Right? There's some epistemologists who are like, well, there are no good definitions of what a belief is. Right? I mean, so. But that's sort of a generic account of what a belief is, the one that I'm fine with. Okay.
So then moving on to justification. What is justification? And so warrant maybe even too.
You can understand justification in different ways. My preference of understanding justification is primarily like through understanding duty, right? So deontologically, for those who are listening who do a little bit of philosophy. Yeah. So are you within your right, basically, in affirming the proposition in question? Or have you committed epistemic sin, right? Yeah. Are you being epistemically irresponsible with your belief-forming process? And so that's kind of how I understand justification. It's more about being within your right and believing something. Warrant, I take as something more interesting. Warrant is basically the special ingredient that turns mere true belief into knowledge. And so you can have true belief, but yet not know something, right? So let's say that you took a pill that's known for giving you all sorts of crazy beliefs, right? And you're like, yeah, I'm just going to take it. I don't care. Let's see what belief I form, right? You take it. Yeah. And then you form the belief that the next person you run into is going to give you $1 million. And you just so happen to be walking across someone's path that, is going to give you $1 million, completely and not connected with the pill, not connected with your belief in any way. I mean, it's just pure accident. Right? Yeah. And so generally epistemologists take the sort of attitude that if you have enough luck in the situation, luck acts as an acid and it sort of dissolves the knowledge. And so you can have a true belief and be really lucky, but yet you don't know. And so the sort of special ingredient, as one of my former students said, the special sauce, you add that special sauce to that true belief and it turns into knowledge, voila. Yeah. So Yeah, that's the idea of warrant, and so there's a particular account of warrant. So people can debate about I want this property. It's a pretty cool property, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I get this property of warrant? I want all my beliefs to possess this property.
Yeah, I want that special sauce, man.
Exactly. And so I have a particular account that I defend that was given by Alvin Plantinga.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna jump in deep on that. Right before that, so what you just brought up was a Gettier case, right?
Mm.
And so
Well, so it might not be a Gettier case because maybe you don't think that I'm within my right in believing.
Yeah, right.
Because of the but here would be a non-controversial Gettier case, one that I think almost everyone will agree on. Let's go ahead and say that you are in Scotland. I lived in Scotland for a few years, doing my PhD there, and there's a lot of sheep in Scotland.
Okay.
And let's say you're just really excited about sheep. I don't know, maybe you even have like a T-shirt with sheep on it. You know, you've got binoculars. You know, you're excited. You're ready to go and to encounter some sheep. And you're in that sort of environment where you expect to see lots of sheep.
Mm.
And all of a sudden you're appear too sheeply.
Yep.
There appears to be a strong experience, call it a seeming, that leads you to affirm the proposition that there's a sheep in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's go ahead and say there really is a sheep in front of you. But here's the caveat. You're actually not seeing a sheep. You're seeing a dog that looks very much like a sheep. Yeah. And behind that dog that looks very much like a sheep is an actual sheep. So it is the case that there is a sheep in front of you.
Yeah.
But not for the reason you think.
Yeah.
And so here's the case where it seems like you're justified. Then you're right in affirming the proposition. You know, you're in Scotland and you're being appear too sheeply. You know, what's not to what more is required? And it's true belief, but yet again, something so accidental in this scenario makes it seem like you don't possess knowledge.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a case that I wanted to bring up with you. I should have mentioned earlier. So I saw this great meme. This dude was like probably a master's student in philosophy because they make weird jokes like this. But he's like, when I'm on Zoom, I took a screenshot or I took a shot of my background here, and I use that as my background. So when people are looking at my Zoom profile, they're seeing my background, but it's not my background. Is that a Gettier case?
Yeah.
That would be. He said he wants to give all his philosophers not true or true beliefs that aren't justified or warranted.
Yeah. So I saw that meme as well, and I cracked up so hard. I love that meme. Yeah. So okay. I think
I love that.
Gettier case. Yeah.
I have so I get fired up that you're a millennial. You're born in 1990. I hope that's not like doxing you or anything. Born in 91 here, so we can get some of the same references. I made my own Gettier case, and I told it to my wife because I'm like, I think this will be simple, and she's like, it's not simple. I don't get it. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I wanted to lay it out for you. So Timmy goes to Toys R Us, and he buys an X-ray-o-matic, and it's like this toy that does X-rays, and it's the 90s, dude. So like they didn't care. It's fine. And he buys a Wonder Ball. Do you remember Wonder Balls? There's a jingle. I wonder what's in a Wonder Ball, and they had like Disney characters inside.
Yeah.
And then they're plastic, and some kid ate the whole Wonder Ball and like choked on it, and so they had to make candy inside, and we were all upset about that.
Okay.
But so little Timmy goes, he gets a Wonder Ball X-ray-o-matic. He X-rays the Wonder Ball, and he sees that inside's a little Zeus figurine from the Hercules.
Okay.
Movie.
And they're making a live action one now, apparently.
They have to. They're doing everything. Mulan, let's just everything. Run it back. So Timmy knows what's inside this Wonder Ball. He puts it in his Pokemon backpack, heads off to school, and he bets his friend Jake $5 that he can guess what's in this unopened, even sealed packaged Wonder Ball. And Jake takes that bet all day. But unbeknownst to Timmy, Caleb, the school of klepto, he stole the X-rayed Wonder Ball out of Timmy's backpack. But however, Timmy's dad just so happened to sneak a Wonder Ball into a different pouch in Timmy's backpack that morning because he loves his son. He wants him to have a Wonder Ball. He knows he loves him. So Timmy reaches in his backpack and grabs his dad's Wonder Ball instead of the X-rayed ball. And it just so happens that inside there's also a Zeus.
Yep.
So he's got a true belief. He wins the $5, but he didn't really have knowledge of what's in the Wonder Ball.
Right.
So it's still a wonder to him.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Now you just need to throw like sock and boppums in there somehow, and you know,
That's great. Edmund Gettier, for those who don't know, he's a philosopher. I don't know. Did he pass away? Is he still alive?
I actually don't know the answer to
Yeah,
this
I don't know
question.
either, because everyone just Gettier, it's what he did, and no one really talks much more about him. But he wrote this like 3-page paper that just changed the whole world of epistemology. And apparently he was just sitting in his desk, and he had like the publish or perish mentality, and just said, "I'll publish this," and rocked everyone's world, which is crazy.
Right.
I love
And
that.
according to this, he is still alive.
Okay. All
Good.
right.
I'm glad you're alive.
Yeah.
You're awesome.
Yeah. Dr.
You
Gettier.
changed history. You're awesome.
It's insane. So getting back to like justification, warrant, stuff like that. Can you tell us the distinction between internalism and externalism?
Right. So you can have you can be like an internalist about justification, an externalist about warrant. You know, you can affirm different views with respect to these different categories, because they're categories about different things, right?
Yeah, you can mix and match.
Exactly. So internalism, the sort of most popular version of internalism, or at least the traditional form of internalism, I'll say that, is what's called access internalism. And the idea is that in order to have a justified belief, you need to have access to the properties which confer justification or warrant. You know, to put it kind of less precise but more understandable to some people, you need to basically have access to reasons or arguments as it pertains to why you're, you know, the properties which make this belief justified or warranted. So and externalism basically is just the denial of this. It says, no, you don't always have to have access to these properties which confer the justification or the warrant.
Yeah.
And so you know, it might be the case that there's something external to your access that's playing a significant role in why your belief is justified or warranted. And so, for example, I just got a dog the other day, and she's a good dog, right?
Yeah.
She's a good girl. And whenever I come home, she gets really excited, and she like, "Oh, hey, it's you again," right? And wags the tail. If someone else came in the door, because this happened, she was like, "Nope," and she ran off. Right? She was like, "I don't want any part of this." So it seems like the dog knows stuff, right?
Yeah.
If I say treat, you know, can't speak it too loud. It seems like that my dog knows something good is coming.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Food. And so it seems like animals know stuff. If you take a lot of cognitive science seriously, I think you're going to come to the conclusion that infants know things, right? But they don't have access to arguments. They don't have access to, you know, it's not like they're forming probabilistic calculations, or anything like that, and yet they still seem to know stuff. And so that's kind of the idea.
Could you say they don't know why they know it? Would that be
right?
Okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's clear that they don't have these sorts of meta level beliefs, or like they don't have these sorts of beliefs about their beliefs, right?
Right. I love that dog recognizing you. That's huge, man. I guess I haven't thought of that, but you know, you think of like classical conditioning, and you can say the dog doesn't really know stuff. He's heard the bell, and so he salivates and stuff. But I don't know that. I think this might be a different case. Seeing your face versus my face, and freaking out when he sees, you know, me, or she freaks out.
Yeah.
I love that. That's really great. I got to think about that some more.
Yeah. So a lot of epistemologists think that there's something called animal knowledge.
Yeah.
And humans possess animal knowledge too, right? We're animals. So, for example, going back to the first question you asked me, you know, that relates to what I eat for breakfast today, right? I mean, so maybe maybe certain memories, maybe, you know, like what's in front of me, my perception, right? Maybe the beliefs that are derived from these sorts of faculties. I don't have access to arguments. Maybe I don't even have access to whether or not my faculties are functioning properly, you know?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it seems like I know, And so philosophers, like I said, it's popular to call this sort of animal knowledge.
Yeah.
While the stuff by way of reflection and arguments is sometimes called reflective knowledge. So, for example, Ernest Sosa made these two categories quite well known. And so, so epistemology, it's not just like a Christian thing. It's not like a theist thing where it's just like Christians are wanting to baptize animals and infants with beliefs in order to help them argue for their own rational beliefs about God or something like that.
Yeah, right. That's great. Okay, so moving on. How about fallibilism? So I'm a theology student, and a lot of times we talk about certainty, and I'm certain that God exists, and it would be really wrong to believe that. And you go over to the philosophers, and they're like, "No, dude, I'm a fallibilist because the opposite is crazy." Yeah. So can you explain that?
Yeah. So there's you can mean fallibilism and infallibilism about lots of things. So you might be an infallibilist about warrant. That's just to say that you think that if someone does have a warrant, then that it follows that they for sure have a true belief. They can't have a false one if they possess warrant. Or you can be a fallibilist about warrant, and you could think that you can have warranted false belief. Right? You could also apply this concept to knowledge in general, that in order to know anything, right, you have to have an infallible belief. So I actually have a friend who does philosophy who affirms this. He's like this, hardcore Cartesian type where, he thinks that literally in order to know P, it has to be such that you can't be wrong about P.
Yeah.
That's by far a minority view, just for the viewers who aren't aware of the current state of the field. And then there's a little bit more of a group, not massive group, but a little bit more of a group who thinks that not all our beliefs have to be infallible, but at least the foundations of our beliefs. So I won't get much ahead of us, because I think you want to talk about this sort of topic. But the idea is that the beliefs, maybe there are beliefs that the rest of our beliefs kind of rest upon and sort of depend on for their own justification. And so these foundational beliefs need to be infallible. And then, of course, there are others who just think that that's not required, but we still do have some beliefs that are infallible, right? So by infallibilist, you can mean lots of different things.
Yeah.
But I'm a kind of a skeptic when it comes to infallible beliefs. I don't think humans do possess any. So, I do think we have knowledge. So obviously, I'm not. I'm not a skeptic. But so Descartes' famous evil demon scenario, right, where you imagine a demon deceiving you, right, or imagine being a brain in the vat, like in the Matrix. Another movie coming out in the near future. And it just seems to me like when I think maybe you think that you for sure, for certain, you can't be wrong about it, that 1 + 1 is 2. Why do you think that? Like, I think largely you think that because obviously some infallibles will disagree with me, but I think what's largely doing the work here is that we have a particular experience or phenomenology. There's a particular experience that we have when we think about one, there's just no other way. Like when we conceptually analyze it, we think, no, it has to be 2, right? Or maybe you take this with other mathematical or logical facts, right? But it's like, why can't we be hardwired in such a way where it seems like it can't be any other way? It seems like we're seeing the truth, so to speak, but actually this is all part of the act from the demon or from the AI that are putting us in the vats, So that's where that is. A lot of philosophers, I think, would agree with that. That denying infallibilism in any sense, really. But does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And it's helpful. I have a wide audience. I got apologists and theologians and philosophers, which is awesome. I love you guys. But some people would say, are you absolutely certain about this? And it's like, well, dude, some people just don't think that's the case, and they're really smart people, right. They'll eat your lunch. So just, be aware that this is a thing, and learn up on that, and maybe you'll change your mind. Maybe you still are a infallibilist, but at least you'll be more aware of what's going on and who you're running into.
Right.
So I wanted to follow up just two more definitional things. I know this might be maybe a more...
Can I...
yeah, please, jump in.
Yeah. So there's a group of apologists that will kind of go around and will oftentimes say, well, are you certain about that? Just kind of...
I know these folks well. Yeah.
Yes. And I think there's nothing self-defeating in saying, actually, no, I don't have certainty with respect to my fallibilism. And so I'm not sure where the self-defeat would be. And of course, if you say, well, if you know it to be true, then that's self-defeating. But that would only be self-defeating, of course, if your own criteria for knowledge included the belief be infallible. And so oftentimes in this crowd, it seems like those things kind of get mixed up a little bit. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
That's great. That's the crowd I run in. So
yes.
I'm very self-conscious to educate the crowd, and
yes. I used to run in that crowd. I did.
I know you did. I want to bring that up later. Yeah. So moving on here, two more definitional things. Truth might be maybe more of a metaphysical concept, but you guys got to deal with truth. So what's truth?
For our purposes, just say it corresponds with reality. It corresponds with how the universe actually is, how reality actually is.
Awesome. And then two more, or last thing here, I want to talk defeaters. So we got undercutting defeaters, we got rebutting defeaters, undefeated defeaters. Can you help us with those three concepts?
Yeah. So think about like a defeater as something that decreases your level of warrant, such that it might make it such that you no longer know that P.
Yeah.
And there are different ways to formulate defeaters. Different ways to formulate these objections or arguments which will drain away the warrant, right? Think almost like a leech. Right? The defeater kind of latches onto the belief and starts to suck out the warrant.
Sucks out that special sauce.
That's right. Yeah. They're hungry spaghetti monsters, and they're after it. Yeah. So there it might be such that you have a rebutting defeater. So a rebutting defeater would be, say that I say P, and you can show me why P is wrong, why P is false, like directly, right? And then you could. There's another way to defeat my belief that P, though, rather than this direct approach. You can do is you can undercut the justification. So say I say P, and I say P because X, Y, Z. What you can do is you can cast doubt on X, Y, Z, and this sort of undercuts. It doesn't directly show that P is false, right? But what it does is that source of justification for thinking that P is gone. And so that's, and then what was the third category?
Undefeated defeaters. But real quick, I wanted to toss in maybe some more millennial callbacks. There's this game on addictinggames.com called Tank Wars. Does that ring any bells?
It doesn't.
Dang
it doesn't. No, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
So Tank Wars, it's this little game, and you're shooting at another tank, and you can blow up the ground that they're on. And so an undercutting defeater would be, you're blowing up. For anyone who knows about Tank Wars, it's why I don't know mathematics, because I just played Tank Wars on the computer all the time. So you'd blow up the ground underneath, and the tank would fall down below. And if you get him to fall all the way down to the bottom, I think he blows up. So that's undercutting defeater. The other defeater is rebutting, and that's if you're blowing up the tank.
Attack the tank, right.
And that actually blows it up. So boom, we're back. And actually, real quick, actually too. So Plantinga in his work, if anyone has read Alvin Plantinga, he's the man. He changed up the game as well. He talks about de jure objections and de facto objections. The treat.
Sorry.
It just finally.
Hey. Nope. No Eevee.
So
notice my dog's name's a Pokemon named Eevee. So,
nice.
Back to the 90s recall.
That's an interesting pick there too. Eevee is like the flower, like they shoot leaves or something.
No. Eevee is it's like fox looking
Oh,
Pokemon.
nice. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
or
better.
fox-ish. Yeah.
Okay. So does undercutting defeater have to do with de jure, and then rebutting has to do with de facto?
Yes. I get where you're going with this. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
So that's just for free for anyone who can understand it. We're not going to go into that as much. But then under undefeated defeaters, how about that?
Yes. So it's just when a defeater. So like you can defeat defeaters, right? So it's like someone throws this little bug that's coming to suck your defeat. Throws it on your belief, but then also you throw one back and it like hits the bug itself and starts sucking out the other bug.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like the defeater blocks the defeat, right?
Yeah.
So maybe your belief was defeated, but then this comes along and goes, that's actually not the case. Self-destruct. Boom.
Yes.
And then you have your belief still there in present form. And there might be certain beliefs that you have so much warrant for. They're just your credence level is so high. So I think that your confidence level is often tied to the degree of warrant you have. So warrant comes in degrees, and so you might have a belief that has such a high degree of warrant that this defeater comes, it tries to latch on, but it can't, and just falls off. And so like the belief sort of deflects the attempted defeater. And so that's also
that's another term, right?
Category.
Defeater deflectors.
Right.
Yeah, when I first started reading Plantinga, I'd listen to anything on YouTube by him, and he'd do these like round tables, and he's like, well, I have a defeater deflector for that, and it's undefeated defeater. Like, okay, I need to study more. Yeah. Okay, so before we jump in, you've already noticed, so Dr. McNabb here, Tyler, is a analytic philosopher, and he does some analytic theology as well. So he's going to say a lot of P's and S's, and that, so P is just it's a stand-in, it's a variable for proposition. S is for subject. So when you guys hear that, when he says I believe that P, he's saying I believe just a fill in the blank proposition.
Right.
So
exactly.
I'm just warning everyone because we're about to go in, and he's about to go next level genius on everybody.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I first I was doing graduate school, and I was reading S's belief that P is warranted if in an IFF, right? That's
yeah,
sort of thing.
Yeah, if and
only if. And I had no idea what what if and only if, like that idea.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I found an error. This person added an extra F, right?
Dude.
So I mean, there's all times where people can get confused with analytic lingo.
When I first got into philosophy, theology, anything like that, I was starting with like John Piper, and in his footnote it said Ibid, and I was like, what is this book he keeps referencing? I can't find Ibid anywhere. And I finally discovered it. Just for those who don't know, it just means like it's like the quotes, the double quotes, like the same as above, and it's like Latin probably or something. And I felt so stupid because I spent like an hour trying to find this resource.
It's okay. In my undergrad, I remember going up to a guy, and instead of saying paradigm, I said paradigm. And I was like, yeah, it seems like the paradigm of.
Oh man!
And they just laughed at me so hard. I was like, I'm gonna make that mistake again. So yeah, it's just part of academics.
So I'm having you had James Anderson on your podcast, Furthering Christendom, and I'm having him on next week, so I'm excited about that. But he says, and we say paradigm, sounds really nice, and then we say paradigmatic, like we're dummies. And James Anderson, just listening to him, he goes, oh, it's very paradigmatic, and I'm like, why haven't we said that? Paradigmatic is so much better, man. But we go paradigmatic, so that's another one for free. Let's jump into proper functionalism here.
Okay.
So maybe we could start. We already got there a little bit, but with foundationalism versus coherentism.
Yeah. Right. So, when you think about what justifies or what enables a belief to be warranted, right? And so maybe if I asked you like, why do you believe that P? Right? You're like, well, I believe that P because of R1. And I was like, reason one, right?
Yep.
And I was like, well, hey, why do you believe R1? And you're like, R2, right? Not to be confused with D2. And then I was like, hey, wait, why do you believe R2? Right? The idea is eventually you would need to stop. or at least some argue this, right? You would end up needing to have some sort of stopping point, like a foundation where it bottoms out, so to speak. Or some people argue that you actually don't have to bottom out. You can sort of end up, your reasoning line can end up back at R1. So say you said R2, R3, R4, R5, R1, right?
Yeah.
And so this would be a coherentist. So the idea is that like beliefs are justified not really by like looking at each individual belief atomistically, but like as a whole.
Yeah.
In a web of beliefs, so to speak. And then there's infinitism, which is the idea that potentially there would be an infinite number of reasons that so in order for belief to be justified, there has to be this potentially infinite line of reasoning that you can go to. And I know some infinitists will say things like just depends on the context, in reference to how far you need to go down the line. No infinitist is gonna say you actually
okay.
You need to, your belief isn't justified or warranted unless you give me every single infinite answer right now.
Right.
Like that's so so that's kind of the idea. These three options are known as Agrippa's trilemma.
Yeah.
And probably it's safe to say that the vast majority of analytic epistemologists are foundationalists. So they go with it needs to stop at some point, right? Some sort of bedrock of knowledge. And but then the question is, what makes a belief foundational, right? So there's a difference between basic beliefs and based beliefs. And so basic beliefs would be like this foundation. Based beliefs would be the beliefs based on these basic beliefs. And so I'm a proper functionalist after Plantinga, and there's other proper functionalists. We're Christians: Andrew Moon, Kenny Boyce, Eric Baldwin. Then there's also naturalists, atheists, who are proper functionalists as well. Peter Graham, Millikan, Sosa seems to be something at least close to a proper functionalist.
Okay.
So it's not just like a Christian theory, so to speak, but it's a well-respected theory that oftentimes is featured in an introduction book to epistemology, right?
Right.
And basically, the idea is that a belief is basic if the design plan of your faculties sort of doesn't designate arguments in order for the belief to be justified or warranted. And so go back to the dog example, right? So earlier, my dog started briefly barking during the podcast, and I looked at her. I was like, "No," she stopped, right?
Yeah.
And so she knew something. It seems like something triggered within her faculties, and she came to know a proposition. And so in this case, like, how did she know? Well, she knows because she has faculties that it's kind of like a computer. Her brain is kind of like a computer. Our brains are even more so like computers. And so this is called a computational model of the brain in cognitive science. I'm not saying our brains are computers on my own personal view, but I do have a lot of sympathy.
Me. I got John Searle in my head and the Chinese room argument just on repeat.
Yeah, I do have sympathy with the idea that at least they're very much something like a computer.
Yeah.
And so computers have design plans, right? They have programming, so to speak. And so in this case, I'm programmed to produce the belief that, hey, I'm talking to you, whenever I have a certain experience, namely, I'm seeing you on a computer and I'm talking with you and so forth. Yeah. Or the dog, right? Whenever I come home, right, she has a particular experience of me, and it forms the belief that, whatever belief she has, some sort of belief. I'm not sure how primitive it is, but
right.
It's something. And so this is the result not of arguments, but rather of her faculties just functioning properly and being a good design plan, being a good program that it gets to true belief a lot. And so that's kind of the idea, is that a belief is warranted if it's produced from properly functioning cognitive faculties that are successfully aimed at truth.
Yeah, I love that. So, and we talked about foundationalism, and Plantinga kind of just run ship on like extreme, hardcore, classical foundationalism in his Warrant series. So, just to clarify, so you're a moderate foundationalist. Is that fair to say? So there's more beliefs in the classical foundationalism. There's like a couple beliefs that you can believe as foundational, you can take as foundational, and then you build everything off. And Plantinga kind of opened up the grid and said there's a lot more in that properly basic. So you're a moderate foundationalist. Is that?
Yeah, you don't find too many classical foundationalists around it much more. There are some very respectable epistemologists who are great minds who are classical foundationalists. Usually for some reason, they tend to be theists or Christians specifically. And so like if you look at the Phil Papers survey, it kind of like outlines, different philosophers that on average what philosophers believe. And theists or Christian philosophers are more inclined on average to believe in internalism than atheists or naturalistic philosophers. And so, still majority of philosophers are externalists or sympathetic with externalism. But so the for example, here's some shameless self-advertising.
Do it.
And this 5 Views book here.
There we go.
There we go. There's my co-editor, John DePoe, contributes a section, and he defends classical foundationalism really well. I think it's the most interesting laid out defense. I really praise him for his work there. But basically the idea for him is that a belief is basic, properly basic, if and only if like the belief's not correctable, right? Like you can't be wrong about that belief. And so there's some trouble with that. So Plantinga, as you mentioned, kind of points out, well, that doesn't seem to be an incorrigible belief, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have an argument. So what's the argument, right? So John DePoe tries to lay out an argument, but if you don't find it's a good argument, right, you're going to go back to, again, what justifies this sort of belief. And you might also think that if there aren't good arguments for belief in other minds, or if dogs and animals or infants don't have arguments, then would they really know? And a lot of philosophers want to try to say that animals and infants know, and so you throw out animal knowledge, which is something that a lot of philosophers won't want to do. And so you have other sorts of problems with classical foundationalism. So the idea is I would differentiate myself with them by opening up the foundations, so to speak.
Okay. Oh, that's great. So how about Plantinga's and the whole Reformed epistemology crew pretty heavily influenced by Thomas Reid, and I'm wondering how much does reliabilism play in Plantinga's model, in your model, and maybe what is reliabilism?
Yeah. So depending on who you ask, proper functionalism is either a subset of reliabilism or maybe a close cousin.
Okay.
And so there are different versions of reliabilism. The most, I think, kind of well-known or traditional version is called process reliabilism. And the idea basically is that as long as there's a process that reliably gets you to truth, so think about a car taking you to work, is it reliable in getting you to work? It might break down sometimes, right? But generally you can count on it, right? And so the idea is that if you have a reliable process that's responsible for the belief that you have, then that belief is justified or warranted, depending on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so they have sort of a less, their claim is weaker, I think, than what the proper functionalist wants, because the proper functionalist is going to say, the faculty needs to get to truth in a reliable manner, right? But you need something stronger. It's not enough to have pure reliability or mere reliability. You need for that process to also have a design plan for a way it should function and not function, and it needs to be working in accordance with its programming. Yeah,
that's great. Okay, that's really helpful. So just once more, proper functionalism summed up, there's a couple conditions of it, right? So a cognitive environment, right? They have to have the right environment Your faculties have to be designed for the environment in which they're operating. Faculties have to be aimed at truth. It has to be a good design plan of your faculties. So it has to be able to produce these beliefs in this proper environment, and they have to be actually functioning properly according to that design plan.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah. And so maybe we're not meant to be in fun houses when we're forming beliefs, right? And maybe there are different scenarios where you could think about having a reliable process that still has too much luck in the situation to where you're going to want to say, no, that's not knowledge. And so that should lead us to think about the proper function condition being so. And those are some general motivations for the theory.
Okay. And so then I don't know if we have touched it yet. We've been around it, but evidentialism in epistemology. Can you lay that out for us and how proper function is different?
So if you take an evidentialist thesis, the idea is that a belief is not justified unless you have access to evidence, right? Or a belief's not warranted unless you have access to evidence. There are very weak ways to construe evidence that I'm comfortable with endorsing an evidentialist thesis. So like if you say that it's just like an experience, right? As long as you have access to this experience, like it's justified. Obviously the classical foundationalist isn't going to be okay with that. They're going to want something stronger, right? They're going to want arguments, usually in the shape of probability. You can be a reformed epistemologist. So I take reformed epistemology to be a minimal thesis again. Basically just the thesis that religious belief can be properly basic, right? Can be justified or warranted apart from argumentation. Yeah. And so there's, for example, one internalist view of justification that says a subject is justified in her belief as long as it seems to her that P, and she has no reasons for thinking that P is false. Yeah. And so, if I form the belief that the computer is in front of me, right? It seems to me that the computer's in front of me and I have no defeater. It's not like I remember taking a pill that makes me hallucinate about computers, right? Right. And so the idea is that my belief would be justified. Well, that's evidence, right? And so, but nonetheless, I'm not basing my belief on arguments, right? Yeah. And so, so you can be an evidentialist and a reformed epistemologist. In fact, once again, shameless self-promotion here. Logan Gage and Blake McAllister, they argue for this sort of view that I'm talking about. It's called phenomenal conservatism, and they also endorse reformed epistemology in the book as well. So they're compatible. Oftentimes it's seen as they're not, because historically, evidentialism oftentimes was construed in such a way, like in a more in a classical foundationalist friendly manner. Yeah. So I'll also join in plugging this book. So this book's great for those who aren't aware. It's a 5 views book, and so 5 different people laying out different takes on religious epistemology, and the other 4 just go at them. And and you guys are actually very cordial with each other, which is fun. It's not always as fun as if you would go for the jugular. But so it's a great book to get into this, because you're getting to see someone who's great in their field saying, here's what I believe, and then other colleagues saying, yeah, but have you considered this? And then what's actually really great about this one too, which some books don't do, they give a rejoinder to the one who wrote the initial essay, so they get to respond to critics. And sometimes you don't get that, and it's like, man, I really want to know what he would say back to him. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So go buy that book. So what are your thoughts? Who won the debate now?
Yeah. Well, I have some prior probabilities and stuff like that going on. So again, I this might be, I think I added this last minute, but you're familiar with like Chisholm's particularist Methodism dichotomy. Is that at play in proper functionalism at all? For the listeners here, there's like, if you're a particularist, you want to start with like, hey, we have knowledge. So since we have
Right.
knowledge, kind of like Kant, right? And Kant says like, well, obviously we have knowledge, so what must be true in order for us to have knowledge? And then there's like the Methodists who are like, well, I don't actually know if we have knowledge until we kind of analyze this method. Can we have knowledge?
Right.
And so I think, yeah, go ahead.
So the proper functionalist will look to this and say, here we know we have knowledge. We know that the dog has knowledge. We know that infants have knowledge. So now we need to come up with a theory that sort of accounts for how this can be. And the Methodist is going to say, no. You know, if it turns out that that the theory entails that we don't have knowledge, then knowledge be damned.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the approach. And so I wouldn't consider myself a Methodist in either the religious or the epistemic manner.
That's great. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I wanted to confirm that. That's great. Yeah. Okay, so this was interesting, and maybe I just had a fuzzy conception of it, but I think a lot of people will conflate Reformed epistemology with proper functionalism, and so you can be a proper functionalist, like you said, and be a Reformed epistemologist. So because Reformed epistemology just means you don't have to have arguments for belief in religious beliefs.
Right. Yeah. So you can be. I mean, I take it that 4 of the authors in here are Reformed epistemologists of some sort.
Yeah.
And not everyone's a proper functionalist.
Yeah.
And so, there. I think, and more shameless self-promotion. In this book here, I go through a lot of contemporary accounts in the first chapter of Justification or Warrant, and basically argue, hey, all of them, or almost all of them are consistent with the thesis of Reformed epistemology.
Yeah, and hold that book up again. That's Religious Epistemology, and that's a great book. It's a Cambridge Element book, so it's like an introduction. But what's great about those is he's not just introducing religious epistemology simplicator, for those who don't know, that's a great word. Not just generally, but he gives an introduction and then argues for a specific point. And I was surprised how much you were able to pack in there. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, they're pretty much the Element series, at least what I was told, was survey the literature and then advance it in some way, and you can argue for your particular position. So I was going to be like, all right, fine, this will be a attempt to brainwash people into proper functionalism and Reformed epistemology. So.
That's great. So here's a question. So Plantinga kind of started this journey with his book God and Other Minds, and he says, just like maybe there's not great arguments for other minds, but we just kind of know that like it makes sense for me to think that you have another mind. I think that's probably fine. Like we need to have that. And just as I can, by analogy, just as I can know that you have a mind, I can also know that God has a mind, or that God is a mind, or that God exists.
Right.
I'm wondering, I love the problems in philosophy. I'm wondering, does Reformed epistemology and proper functionalism, does it like erase all the classical problems in philosophy, like external world, brain in a vat, idealism? The Earth was just made 15 seconds ago with appearance of age and fake. Does it just erode all of those?
Yeah, it does. Warrant and proper function, basically, that's there's kind of like an indirect argument for proper functionalism that Plantinga makes. And Warrant and Proper Function, his 1993 Oxford volume, where he basically goes through these traditional problems, problem of induction, problem of other minds, memory, issues with memory in the past. And he basically says, here, look, this is how proper functionalism solves all of this. So yeah, I think that's one of the benefits to the model.
That's great. So that would be an argument for proper functionalism. Right. Hey, you don't get all these crazy problems that all the other guys are stuck with.
Look at classical foundationalism compared, all these troubles with skepticism, but proper functionalism, no problem.
So I want to move on to the Sensus divinitatis. Right. And that's from taken the phrase, I think at least, is taken from Calvin and its Institutes, but Plantinga says he calls it his AC model because he sees it also in Aquinas. Right. And so can you lay out what is the Sensus divinitatis from Plantinga?
So the idea is that there's this faculty or faculties that humans have that are responsible for producing belief about God and his activities. And so this meshes well with a lot of what cognitive science of religion seems to support, that humans are kind of hardwired, where we have a particular disposition to naturally see divinity all around us. And so, that's the basic idea. And so Plantinga goes, well, hey, if those faculties are functioning properly and aimed at truth and so forth, then our belief about God, his activities, could be warranted, even apart from argumentation.
Yeah. And so in Plantinga's conception, I know there's a debate within Dutch Reformed theology, within all sorts of people, whether, because Plantinga kind of makes a sense of the divine, he makes it into a faculty, and it can be broken, it can be like harmed, so that's not functioning properly to produce belief in God or a sense of divine. Whereas, other people, Scott Oliphant in debating Christian religious epistemology book, he says, no, the Sensus divinitatis just gives you knowledge. It's not a faculty.
Like it is knowledge, or he says something like that.
Yeah, it's like implanted knowledge, or you can argue a bunch of different ways. Maybe as soon as you're able to cognize it all, you just have this immediate awareness. And so Plantinga's argument is that it's a faculty that doesn't work, that can be broken.
Right. So that debate doesn't concern me too much, as you might know, I'm a Catholic, right? So the debate about whether it's proper exegesis to Calvin, but to be honest, even when I was Reformed, I wasn't too concerned about it, because it seems, and I mentioned this in the book as well, it seems broadly at least Calvin inspired, even if you don't want to say it's exactly his thought. That it still seems proper to say it's Calvinistic or Reformed, more generally speaking. And so if you're wanting to be Reformed and you're just like waking up in the morning going, Reformed, right? And I just want to believe Reformed stuff. It seems like there's still enough there that you should be comfortable with. But I prefer Plantinga's version, as I think it's much more plausible. And so, I think this is a question I asked Scott and the volume. What do we do with embryos, prenatal humans, right? Fetuses. What do we do with them, the persons? Do they know that God exists? Right? Is it something that every person's have? Or what about people who are severely mentally challenged, who have certain severe handicaps, cognitive handicaps? Are we going to say that, they know God? And so if it's just something that belongs to every person by, because they're a human person made in God's image or something like that, then I think you're going to get some implausible sort of consequences relating to this. If you view it more like a faculty, then you can say, oh no, the prenatal human hasn't developed those sorts of faculties yet, it needs to mature, right? Or the infant's faculty needs to mature, or the severely mentally challenged person, their faculties have been so significantly damaged that theirs isn't working rightly, So I think that there's some implausibility maybe in the way that some presuppositionalist covenantal epistemologists kind of understand Calvin there. So even if that is the correct interpretation of Calvin, right? Who am I to figure that out? But Plantinga's, to me, seems there's some benefits to going with his account.
Yeah, and just as an aside, you're gonna have to make some extra moves, everyone, I think. But if you say the it has to do with culpability for knowledge, because everyone wants to go to Romans 1 because that's where Calvin's going. So, if their cognitive faculties are broken, then perhaps God's not going to hold them as culpable, because it doesn't seem right. And then for someone else, they'd say, well, God implants the knowledge, right? It's maybe more of like an Augustinian divine illumination. And so that can take us off into theology some more, and what we think and where we're getting our sources from. But just wanted to broach that topic, because you've done some interesting work in the SD, the Sensus divinitatis, that I want to get to. Do you got time to keep going here?
Yeah.
Okay,
my
cool.
family's trapped in America right now for the past 6.5 months. So
crazy. So another just quick one is Reformed epistemology fideism.
So I guess it depends on how you define it, right? So if you think it just means like irrational
Yeah.
faith, right? Like that it's just an apologetic really for the permissibility to have a rational faith. Then
Yeah.
obviously I would take issue with it and say, no,
Yeah.
that's not at all what
Yeah.
it is. Now, if you said that, well, I'm defying fideism by way of saying that you can believe something apart from argument,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe you want to call it quasi, right? Put quasi fideism. I'm more comfortable in calling it like maybe something like that. But generally, when I think of it, that topic, I think of like Kierkegaard's like leap from the absurd, or into the absurd, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it seems to me it's almost like believing something that you think it's probably not the case, or you think is irrational, but you're just going to do anyway, right? And so, at least as an analytic who doesn't do much work in that area, that's kind of my conception of it. And so I would want to say, no, it's not fideism in that sense.
Yeah. So if you guys didn't catch it, Tyler he's an analytic philosopher, like we said. So for him to bring up Kierkegaard is like it's like a shameful like name. If you were to call it, that's very Kierkegaardian of you. It's because he's a continental theologian, philosopher type cat. Right. Yeah. So that was just know that for folks at home. Yeah.
Painful.
Yeah, Tyler, I wanted to get into your own personal journey real quick, and then get into what you've added to the field.
Okay.
So how'd you get involved in philosophy?
Yeah. So from eternity past, God predestined. No.
Amen.
Yeah. So I was a senior in high school, became an agnostic for a short period of time. Long story short, had a religious experience, led me to faith, a very sincere faith. Started street evangelizing like a couple months later. Really went full throttle into theology and apologetics, and ended up at like a really liberal Baptist university. After I graduated, it was my senior year, graduated, and basically had to do more apologetics. Like my intro to the New Testament was like intro to Jesus seminar.
Oh, nice.
Or like that was the average New Testament class, was intro to Jesus seminar, and like my Old Testament class was like intro to documentary hypothesis theory and liberation theology of the Old Testament.
Great.
And so I was basically like forced to get more involved in apologetics, and so I kind of just had a knack for it, and I ended up having like a year. It literally was basically almost exactly a year of great doubts, where I bought into a bad epistemology. And I'm sure some of your viewers might be offended by this, but I bought into a bad epistemology that in order to know something, I had to be certain of it. And that just like messed me up big time, because I was like, I'm decent. Like I know the arguments better than the average person off the street, but like, come on, I'm an undergrad student, right? Some professor at some prestigious university who's an atheist who's been doing this for 40 years, publishing in peer-reviewed journals, is probably going to destroy me. And so I was like, oh my gosh. And then I'll be shown to be irrational, and I'll be shown that I don't know that God exists. And this just basically was like bugged the heck out of me. And so I finally ended up reading Warranted Christian Belief, and was like, oh man, I can actually just trust my intuitions. I can just like basically know on what appears to me to be the case. And as long as I don't have the defeater for the belief, then I'm good to go. And that was like so freeing that I was just like, I'm going to spend the rest of my philosophical career defending, Plantinga's epistemology. And so there's a lot of existential value, I think, in this sort of approach. Not that I don't think there are good arguments. I do, and I have published a couple, but the idea is just that they're not necessary. And grandma can know. Yeah,
amen, dude. I love that. That's I don't know did Plantinga say that, because I've given that Plantinga is like he's back in my grandmother, right?
Right. No, I know the Lydia McGrew has a paper who I think the paper is entitled something like "Why Grandma Doesn't Know," or something to that effect.
Okay.
And so I remember I got into a debate. It might have been with Tim McGrew, I think it was. Do you know who Paul Manata is?
Yeah.
So me and Paul Manata were like, I think, debating Tim, if I'm not mistaken, about whether the average person will basically just cite an experience, or will just cite basically, they won't call it this, but a seeming, for their belief or not. And so we asked our moms and like, I don't know, our close relatives who don't do philosophy whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they all favored our, like, oh, just had this experience, or it just seems to me, these basically Plantingian sounding sort of.
Yeah.
And of course, Tim was like, no, you asked the questions unfairly, And so we had good fun, good answer back and forth with respect to whether the average person thinks they have, whether the average person thinks it's necessary or not to have arguments and so forth.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. So in the background here, it gets cut off here for you guys, but it's like one of the most epic pictures of Alvin Plantinga with his arms crossed, and he's making this great face. I wish you guys could see it, but Google it. So something that I found. So I'm a presuppositionalist, and I'm more in line with James Anderson, who
right.
He takes a ton from Plantinga and from Van Til. Yeah. And I found something helpful. I'm not sure if it was original to him that I found it, or someone else, but distinguishing between a cause for my faith and a reason for my faith. And so yeah, I believe the cause of my faith is the Holy Spirit, illumined me and gave me this belief. And so even if my reasons end up being bad reasons, or, I still have the cause. I believe, and it's a cause, but it's a reason that the Holy Spirit caused me to believe this, and God predestined me before the foundation of the, right. So you could, one argument I think against it is like, well, it's kind of ad hoc then. So you're just taking this position and then you're just having ad hoc arguments. If they don't work, you're just going to reformulate your arguments. Like, well, yeah, but that is my foundation, I guess. Right. So,
well, I think if you can like sort of parody the argument a bit, and it seems very plausible, right? So let's say that you have warranted belief that other minds exist. Right?
Yeah.
Vast majority of people in the world are going to grant you that.
Yeah.
Now let's go ahead and say you believe that because your faculties have the particular programming that it has, and it intakes certain experience and sort of outputs the belief. Now let's say someone asks you and they say, "Hey, Parker, why do you believe that other minds exist?" And you start giving arguments and evidence and so forth. And let's say like you actually give pretty poor arguments, and which of course you wouldn't ever. But let's say in this pretend scenario,
right.
you might. And just because you can't articulate good arguments or reasons, so to speak, like we can even say that the arguments are bad, nonetheless you can still know that other minds exist, right? Even if you're not even aware of why you know.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I this might not be a good another pairing here, but I think of like English language. So I can use the English language, but before I studied Greek and Hebrew, I didn't know anything about syntax and semantics and, all of that. And it's like, you ask me to describe English to you and I can't even do it very well, but I can use English and I still use it according to the rules, roughly, at least.
There's so many times when I'm like writing a paper or a book or something, and I'm using a word, I'm like, you know what? Let me double check, make sure I actually know what the word means. Or, I mean, when I first got into philosophy, I was like, wait a minute, what's a proposition again? Like, I need to make sure I know for sure what a proposition is, And so, I mean, that's I think that's quite normal.
I think that's normal. And then for us, going back to the millennial card, Google has probably messed us up with that.
Right.
Spell check, like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And like, my wife's teaching my kids cursive right now, and I'm like, just teach them how to sign their names. They're not going to use it for the rest of their lives.
For real.
Or, it's just,
oh man.
Yeah.
It's like when they told us we're not going to have a calculator in our pocket all the time. Fail.
Like fake news.
Yeah. So man, you just answered pretty much all my questions. I was going to ask how you specialize in epistemology, how you came to be a proper functionalist, but Plantinga kind of saved you from this dark period brought on probably by some presuppositionalism.
Right. Some bad presuppositionalism at least. And so you can say that, I mean, I might still be a Christian, right? Without encountering Plantinga's epistemology, but from my human perspective, I'm not sure if that existential crisis really would have ever ended, or if I would constantly be in this flux, this work about, whether or not I know, or if one day I'll realize I don't know, or, these sorts of things. So all those main worries that plague me, day and night. I give a lot of credit to Plantinga and his work.
That's
Thomas
so great.
Reid also, because Plantinga basically is a analytic contemporary version of Reid, who then throws in the religion part. So
yeah, no, that's great. So I know that some presuppers out there are like, dude, that's not presuppositionalism. And because a lot of guys will say that to the evidentialists, and they'll go, you're an evidentialist, apologist. And so what if the weight of the evidence goes the other way? And a lot of guys think it's very noble to say, yeah, I tell my kids, if you find evidence that disproves God, then follow it, and so people get triggered by that.
Right.
Just acknowledging, like he said, it's bad presuppositionalism. Just everybody relax. It's okay. we're gonna keep going here. Here's what I want to add. I want to talk about your addition to the conversation, because you've advanced some stuff. You added some new cool stuff. Where'd you do your dissertation, and what was it on? And who was it under?
Yeah, so I did my PhD at the University of Glasgow. Victoria Harrison was there at the time. She's a notable philosopher of religion, especially in the UK and Asia. I went there because I wanted to do some comparative work where I wanted to sort of explore whether or not various religious traditions could utilize Plantinga's epistemology, right? That's kind of an objection that some people make. I call it the Pandora's box objection, where it's like, okay, well, if Plantinga's right about his epistemology, right? It seems to open up Pandora's box, because like everyone and their mother can use his epistemology to show that their religious belief, or even non-religious belief, right? Could be warranted apart from argument, and they can meet the proper function conditions and so forth. And so I kind of go in and say, all right, no, that's not the case actually. In order to have proper function, you need to have a designer, according to Plantinga. Here are the reasons why he says this. You might think not, but here, let me go ahead and respond to these possible objections to further Plantinga's point. You have faculties that aimed at truth, not faculties that are producing illusions or something like that, right? Or in Islam.
Yeah. So you guys wrote a paper about Islam.
So Eric Baldwin in our paper, and we also talk about it in our book, God seems to have an interest in deception. He boasts about being the best deceiver, for example. And in Surah 8, it seems like he even deceives Muhammad and his military, not for bad reasons, but for some greater good. And so we say, like, imagine, that there's a general and he's going around shooting his own soldiers with a particular, like, nefarious laser gun. And if the laser hits you, it produces false belief in you. So maybe he sets the gauge to, like, I don't know, reinforcements are coming. And so upon being shot with the laser, they'll form this belief and be, like, emboldened and will fight more fiercely, right? And so now let's go ahead and say that you find out that your general did this, and that you remember that there's been an occasion or two or three where he's kind of boasted about how good he is with this deception gun. Yeah. And then you start to wonder, like, oh my gosh, has he used this on me a lot more than once? And so maybe this can go into some issues with the truth-aimed part of Plantinga's conditions. But also, in the philosophical tradition, there's been a large part of the orthodox philosophical tradition in Islam. There's this idea that God kind of designs us to have doubts, and he designs us to overcome doubts by way of accessing arguments. And we don't have robust knowledge until we do that. There's even some Muslim traditions that say, if you don't do that, you're not a Muslim, or others, they'll say you're a Muslim, but you're not a good one. Yeah. And so, the idea here is that this doesn't fit as well as, like, say, the Reformed tradition does, not requiring this. And so a lot of this sort of comes from, like, the Quran's command to test it to see if it's true, and that sort of thing. They take it very seriously, that command. And so, anyway, so even with something like Islam, where you might think, well, it's so close to Judaism and Christianity, nonetheless, there are still some issues. With Mormonism, Eric and I have a paper talking about this in Philosophy Christi, where if you think the actual infinites aren't metaphysically possible, then and yet the story that you tell about how we got our cognitive faculties depends on an actual infinite. Yeah. Right. Maybe actual infinite number of designers, like perhaps what you have, I think, plausibly so in Mormonism. Yeah. And so, well, then that you're not going to be able to really make sense of the design plan in that
That's
case.
great.
And
So the reason that there might be an infinite number of designers in Mormonism, again, another one where you think, well, that sounds so much like Christianity. Well, it's because Jesus became God, and God the Father became God, and who was once man shall become God. I forgot all the old English there, but they keep going on back, and so there's not actually a creation account. There's not like this ex nihilo.
It's not the God of classical theism, who is the unmoved mover, pure act, right? Who is sustaining everything. It's kind of like this very theistic personalism on steroids. where it's like you too can become God.
Right. And we can design our own people.
Poster. Right.
Yeah. That's great. Going back to Islam, I'm not trying to be offensive here. So please don't be offended, everyone. But it sounds a little bit like Descartes' evil demon of, like he's intentionally deceiving, stuff like that. So, and you might lose your warrant then if you have that belief.
If you become convinced that that's what's going on. Yeah. And so we offer ways out for so that the faithful Muslim can escape it.
Okay.
Maybe they appeal to just the strength, the degree of warrant they have for Islam is just so powerful that this possibility is just really not going to defeat them. Or, maybe they built such a relationship with the general where it's like, the generals become basically like a dad, and they're just, they understand that it's a possibility. They maybe even feel pulled by it, but nonetheless, they trust their dad, And so, I mean, there's different ways out. It's not like this is like a home run.
Right.
But nonetheless, I think there probably will be some people who will be a little perplexed by that. And of course, as Christians, we have to realize that there's deception. So it seems, at least in the Old and New Testament, they're usually directed at people, unbelievers. Right? I can't recall any case where it's directed at a believer. Where God deceives a believer, someone faithful. So like he might permit an evil spirit to deceive, or something like that. But
someone might say like Abraham, like he was deceiving him because he thought he was gonna kill his son, but all the while God didn't know. But then you could say, well, God changed his mind if you're an open theist or something. But yeah, there's some stuff in there. I think
except even with that though, it's not like God causes a hallucination in Abraham, or God causes visual faculties
puts the knife down and his son's not there, and
he doesn't say, like, he says go sacrifice, but he doesn't say I'm going to kill your son, or he doesn't actually say something false. I think with my memory, everything is consistent with truth there. So
that's a great point. So I think what's really cool about you in your work here is you're saying, look, the Pandora's box thing that a lot of people bring against Plantinga, it's not as strong a case as you think. And Plantinga himself brings up the Great Pumpkin, and what you're saying is basically, you can believe in the Great Pumpkin if he designed your cognitive faculties, if he's done this, and basically you're taking out the content of the Great Pumpkin and you're putting in the attributes of God and his design plan for so you're just calling God Great Pumpkin, and you probably shouldn't do that.
Right. So if you're like, well, hey, why think if theism is true, then it's probably warranted? Well, because if God exists, he's being all good. He'd want to create in me a way to know him in a personal way, and he'd be powerful enough to do it. And, you start listing God's properties. He transcends me, and so, okay, well, if your Great Pumpkin transcends you and is all loving and wants a relationship with you and is powerful enough to do it, and it's just like, maybe you're really just talking about God, but he has a particular interest in pumpkins or something. I think Plantinga says something like that. So that seems right to me. But at the end of the day, it's like, so what? Let's go ahead and say that that these other religious traditions can use Plantinga's epistemology. Why think that just because two people disagree that necessarily entails defeat? Right? We don't think of that about politics. We don't think about that in reference to science. Right? Two competing hypotheses could be examined, two different scientists, but we're not like, guys, we got to defeat it for both of y'all. Namely, y'all's own disagreement.
Well, unless you're Richard Feldman, right? And you bring up the we could maybe jump into that with disagreement literature, and you've brought, can we jump into that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so in recounting or discussing the reliability of the Sensus divinitatis, you bring up a couple of different points. There's cognitive science, which we kind of broach, divine hiddenness, and disagreement. So maybe we could start with disagreement, and the philosophy textbook theft. Is that
Right,
fresh in your mind? I'm impressed by how much your work is still in there, because for a lot of people, you think he wrote the book, he should know this, but you get so in depth when you're writing this
right.
stuff. It's really hard to remember a lot. Like if you think back on your
Yeah,
papers, and who knows what I wrote, but you do a great job of having this
that's
fresh
kind
in
of
your
you.
mind. Yeah.
That's kind of you. Yeah, no, it's always funny because like whenever I interview people for furthering, for my podcast, Furthering Christendom,
Yeah.
Usually the philosopher's like, well, I had to go back in my book and had to like reread,
Yeah.
make
I love
sure
that.
what's there. And you always get like the spouse who will be like, so reading a good book there, huh? It's like,
That's awesome.
but yeah, so yeah, so the example that you gave is in reference to um, let's not directly related to disagreement, but definitely at least indirectly related, right?
Yeah.
So there's this case. So maybe you think that according to like third person point of view, sort of an objective third person point of view, using the probabilities from this point of view. So that means you can't take anything into consideration that's not examinable by like a third person perspective, right? So think about like being in a courtroom sort of scenario, right? And you obviously can't like take out some of your experiences or memories, right, and put it for everyone to play. So from a third person perspective point of view, maybe you think that you need to believe what's most probable. And so that seems false, though. And so, let's say that you're known for stealing books. I see you got a lot in the background there, right? So let's say that Parker's known for stealing books at his local half-price bookstore or something like that. And let's say that maybe they even have like Parker's face picture up on the wall at Half Price Book saying, watch out for this guy. This guy likes to steal books.
You got my Parker's Pensy logo right there.
Exactly. Right there. And, let's say that there was footage of a guy looking exactly like Parker and some eyewitnesses saying they saw Parker, and maybe even DNA evidence saying this is Parker's DNA. And, let's say some books went missing. From this third person perspective view, it looks damn probable that you stole the books, right? The probability is extremely high. But it's like, well, what if you have like a distinct memory that you were like walking your dog on the beach at the time you supposedly stole the books, right?
Yeah.
And let's say like your degree of warrant is so ridiculously high for you not stealing the books, right? For you walking the dog on the beach. Well, are we going to say that you need to switch your belief? You have a defeater now for your belief, or like, I don't know, here's something that you might have watched. I watched it growing up. Prison Break. Right?
Yeah, dude,
so,
great show.
2006 or so. Was like one of my favorite shows. I even shaved my head constantly because like, I'm going to be like a Prison Break brother.
That's awesome.
And the brother Lincoln Burrows, he gets set up, right? There's like, if I remember correctly, there's like camera evidence, might even be DNA evidence. There's like all this various evidence that makes it look like that he killed a senator's brother.
Yeah.
Right. But he is like a distinct memory. No, I did not kill. I did not kill him. So in that case, we're going to be like, all right, Lincoln, you have a defeater here. You need to go with whatever's probable according to this third person perspective point of view.
Yeah.
No, and that just seems silly. That seems false. And so, so in that case, whenever you have defeat, and so even from the third person perspective view, they're like, well, listen, you three guys are arguing. You all think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
From where I'm standing, you should all just have defeat. Right? And that doesn't seem right to me. At the end of the day, if you're reflecting on everyone disagreeing with you, but your faculties are designed to still continue to produce the belief in question, and you have warrant and you have a high degree of confidence even still upon reflecting this sort of scenario, then on my view, you still have a warrant. You don't need to have a defeater. And more directly in reference to just disagreement more generally, Plantinga gives a great example, I think. He talks about like, hey, let's say you and I are arguing about whether or not it's okay to lie about your colleagues in order to advance your own career. and I say yes, you say no. Let's say we're peers, we've read all the literature about this, we've talked to people, we have the same sort of experiences, but nonetheless, at the end of the day, we come to a different view on this. I think you're totally fine. Still, believe me, I don't think you have a defeater just because you have a peer who disagrees with you about this topic, right?
Right.
And so, the idea itself just seems kind of self-defeating. And so if you're like, okay, well, let's say that whenever there's genuine peer disagreement, you have a defeater, or something like that. Well, what if you have genuine peers who disagree with you about that?
Ooh,
then
okay.
You have a defeater about that. And
yeah.
So, and of course, you could always just think you're not really an epistemic peer with the person you're disagreeing with. Maybe you think you have special access. Like my Sensus divinitatis is functioning properly, but not this guy, right? So those would be the ways that I would address.
I like that.
Largely.
Yeah, one of my buddies studies epistemology at Northwestern. He brought this up and it freaked me out at first because he's talking about Richard Feldman, and there's these people in his course that the students in undergrad, and they all want to believe that reasonable people can disagree, and they're more than atheists and Christians, and they all think that they're epistemic peers. They share their evidence, but he's like, no, it's not reasonable for you to continue to believe yours and not think that they're reasonable if you think you're peers. And so well, then maybe you're just not peers. Maybe that's okay. I have the Sensus.
So you can go that route, or you could also just say, well, hey, if we're defining, what's reasonable, what's rational by way of my faculties functioning properly, and my faculties are designed to continue producing this belief, even in light of peer disagreement, then I'm okay. So I'm what you call a steadfaster instead of a conciliatoriist. Yeah.
I learned that maybe that's what Plantinga was getting at, where he's like, am I supposed to work at not believing what I believe? Wouldn't that be irrational? Like to just how does one let go of their belief? I let go of my belief that I'm sitting at a desk.
I still can't let go of my belief that or in this case, I still can't let go of my belief that it's wrong to lie about your colleagues in order to advance your career. But I have a defeater, so I need to, let go of my belief. What else can I do?
Right. Yeah. I'm going to start lying to start acting on that belief, Yeah, that's I like that. I like that style of, well, why should I do that? I want to get into, we've been going for a while. Thanks so much for your time, man. This has been fantastic. Yeah. Let's see. I want to actually go to the Swamp Man.
Yeah.
I was so excited to see you use this. I heard your interviews on like capturing Christianity, and this was way before I got into Davidson. And so this last summer, I read tons and tons of Davidson. I love him. I love his triangulation argument. I'm trying to formulate my own thing from that. And then I went back to your work and I saw you use the Swamp Man. I was all fired up. Can you recount the Swamp Man?
Yeah. So let's say that, Parker's chilling in a swamp because that's what, Parker does in his downtime.
I actually do that. Yeah. I love turtles and frogs. Everyone at home's laughing like, yeah, that's just a normal day for him.
Yeah. So let's say Parker, is chilling in the swamp and lightning strikes, and hits a tree, and like all these crazy conditions are just such that while Parker gets disintegrated, an identical replica of Parker emerges from all these crazy conditions being in this area. And Parker, let's call him Swamp Parker. He looks like Parker, talks like Parker, has the same beliefs as Parker. If I'm like, hey, Parker, when did Christopher Columbus sail the ocean blue? Parker's like 1492, right? If I'm like, hey, what's the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics? Parker would be like, an Aristotelian approach, of course. Like
not that multi-world stuff or whatever.
Yeah, none of that multi-world stuff. Many worlds interpretation. And so it seems like he's able to give reasons and arguments and beliefs, has the same beliefs, etc. In fact, no one even notices a difference. Like Swamp Parker just goes home because that's where he believes he lives, right? Maybe he goes out continually to TA for his various classes and get his advanced graduate degrees in philosophy, theology, etc. And so the idea is, does Swamp Parker know? So you might initially think that he does know, because hey, he's able to have access to good reasons. His faculties are reliable, right? They meet sort of some internalist and externalist conditions. So it just seems like Swamp Parker knows. And yet it's not like Swamp Parker has a design plan, so to speak. He came out from all these crazy conditions just so happening to, hit each other in such the right way where he emerged.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't seem to have a design plan. And so traditionally, people have given this as a counterexample to proper functionalism. And Plantinga's traditional response was to say, well, it's just not metaphysically possible. Right? So it's not a counterexample.
Yeah.
And so what Kenneth Boyce and Andrew Moon and myself have done, and Bergman as well, we've kind of said, okay, let's say that Swamp Man is metaphysically possible. I do tend to think that Swamp Man is metaphysically possible, or at least something very close to it is metaphysically possible. So what is a proper functionalist going to do? And there are various arguments where you kind of concede Swamp Man is possible, but show actually he's evidence for proper function. And so there's kind of two ways that I generally do this. One way is to say, okay, what are epistemologists after? Epistemologists are after what I call a tight connection to truth, a tight connection between the belief being produced from the faculties and that belief being true. There needs to be some sort of connection there. And so if we start talking about Swamp Man, it seems like, let's say Swamp Man produces the belief that there's an alligator in the swamp, when in fact there's an alligator in the swamp. It's not as if his faculty should be producing this belief, right? So we can change it up a little bit. Let's say that he produces the belief that his girlfriend, Swamp Girl, is in the swamp, but really it's an alligator.
Yeah.
Right? Like we could say that Swamp Man's faculties are malfunctioning, right? His faculties literally have no way in which they should or shouldn't produce beliefs at all. And so
because they're a product of chance, right? There's no design plan.
Exactly. There's no design plan. And so just because he's producing true belief, it doesn't follow that that he actually knows, because there's a lot of luck in here. Remember what I said earlier, enough luck sort of dissolves knowledge. And so
special sauce.
Exactly. And so given that his faculty shouldn't be producing these beliefs, but nonetheless they do, there's something serendipitous about this. And so that's one approach. Another approach formulated by Kenny Boyce and Andrew Moon is to say, why do people think that Swamp Man knows stuff? Well, here's a central intuition. The central intuition is that if two subjects produce the same belief in the same sort of an environment, right, and in the same sort of way, and if one's warranted, then that means the other's warranted.
Yeah.
And so they think of a counterexample to this, and a comparison between Billy and Zork. And so Zork is this alien, this different planet or different universe where the quantum mechanics make it such where, some rule about quantum mechanics and physics, whatever the explanation is, makes it such that whenever you don't observe something red, the object that's red actually disappears, right? So cognitive science teaches us that really early on, infants have belief in object permanence, that the object still exists even if you're not observing it, right?
And that's when they put a cloth over it or whatever, and you can do all sorts of fun games with your kids and mess with them.
Exactly. So let's say that Billy, though, on Earth, human baby, human person, just like you and I are, has a cognitive malfunction, and he produces the belief that whenever something that's red is not being observed, it no longer exists. Well, now let's say that Billy gets abducted by Zork's species, and they bring him back to their universe, their planet. And now let's say they put him next to Zork. They're in the same environment, right? They have the same sorts of experiences. And they produce the same sort of belief. Namely, when they have like a red box, they put it away. Both infants produce the belief that the red box no longer exists.
Yeah.
And so, what do you do in this case? Well, it seems like Zork knows maybe, but it doesn't seem like Billy knows. Well, why doesn't Billy know? Well, because he doesn't have proper function. Well, Zork does.
Yeah.
And so it seems like the best explanation for why he does is proper function. So not only is it a defeater for the central intuition, but it's also sort of positive reason for proper function. There's Jeff Tolley recently came out with a paper where he tries to respond to this and argue that's not the case, that it's actually not evidence for proper functionalism, that a certain reliabilism can accommodate these intuitions. But in this volume, I respond to him and say, actually, that's not so. And then Boyce and Andrew Moon also have a new paper coming out that also responds to him in more detail.
Oh, awesome.
They'll also reference what I say there. So, so that's kind of how Swamp Man relates to proper function. Overall, it's a motivation for believing in proper functionalism rather than an objection, I think.
I love that. It reminds me a little bit of Richard Taylor's like white stones analogy or intuition pump. Are you familiar with that at all? It's like an argument from reason kind of thing.
Yes, I think so.
So you could be on like a tram to Disney World and you look out on the hill and there's a bunch of white stones that says welcome to Disney World. And there's at least, two possible ways it's there. One is that someone designed it and put it there and said welcome to Disney World. And the other is that really implausible, but logically possible that a dump truck dumped a bunch of white stones and it spells it all out. If you think that the first is the case, someone's trying to give you content, you can read it for content and you can say, well, maybe I'm in Texas and they don't have Disney World, so someone's lying to me, or maybe I am. But if you think the second is the case, that it happened by accident, you'd be an idiot to read that for content. I believe it came there by accident, but yet I'm going to read it. And so I think the analogy over to Swamp Man is like, you think that about your cognitive faculties, that they came by chance, and yet you're trusting them to tell you that they came by chance. And you think that there's this tight connection, as you say, to truth there, but yet you have this undercutting defeater, I would say, and maybe it's self-defeating, thinking that they came by chance, and yet you're using them for truth.
Yeah, so I think it gets into two things. One, I think what it amounts Swamp Man to be is like the ultimate walking Gettier example. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
And two, what that I think also it kind of relates to a different argument that Plantinga comes up with, known as the evolutionary argument against naturalism, right? Where he's like, hey, if your cognitive faculties are the product of random mutation, why trust them?
Yeah.
And including the belief in naturalism that it produces. And this is kind of how you get the self-defeat thing that you mentioned. And so, so I do take it that the proper function arguments are distinct from the evolutionary argument against naturalism.
Yeah.
But in Plantinga's debate with Tooley and their book Knowledge of God, he gives them as two distinct arguments, but that one. Nonetheless, they are, I think, related. So.
And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So we're going to do a spate of questions pretty quick here, but I wanted to finish up with this because you kind of came into apologetics, I think, early on with Greg Bahnsen. Is that? And so you're familiar with the language of transcendental arguments, and I was all fired up to see you use that in your religious epistemology book. That was fantastic. And so William Lane Craig in the 5 Views on Apologetics book, I think Zondervan maybe, he says Plantinga's proper function is a transcendental argument, and Van Til's out. The new has come. Plantinga is the real one. Look to him. So you're arguing. Would you argue that proper functionalism in the Plantingian vein, is that a transcendental argument for a designer of our cognitive faculties?
I wouldn't argue that Plantinga's epistemology is a transcendental argument. I would argue that it has the resources so that you could formulate one very easily.
Okay.
And so if you think proper function is necessary, sort of is necessary for knowledge, and you think God is a precondition to make proper function intelligible, right? To use very Bahnsian language there.
Yeah, sure.
Then it seems like, God's a precondition to make knowledge intelligible. And so, I think you can develop a transcendental argument there.
That's fantastic. So just bringing it all back before we go into our spate of questions here. So Tyler, I can know what I had for breakfast this morning without demonstrating that.
Because your faculties are designed in a certain way. As long as the programming is good and it's working all rightly, then And
likewise, I can have belief in God, believe it exists without similar arguments.
For the same exact reasons. That's right.
Awesome.
Because that way you're hardwired.
Love it. Okay, so now to the really important stuff. Who's the best?
Really important.
Yeah, who's the best Ninja Turtle?
Leonardo, for sure.
Leonardo.
He's got the heart. I know everyone liked Raphael, because he's kind of like the rogue. He's kind of like Logan in X-Men.
That's right, Rude Raph.
But Leonardo had like the heart and the leadership, I think, to really get it done.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so this
kind of
actually
like Cyclops and X-Men. But.
Yeah, that's true. Man, Cyclops kind of nerd, but I feel what you're saying. The leadership there. What happens when someone gets all the Dragon Balls? What's the deal with that?
You get a wish from a
Oh, is
dragon
that
comes
what
out.
a
Yeah,
dragon
yeah,
comes
yeah.
out?
Yeah, and you get a wish from the Dragon Balls.
Dang. And then
You
they
can like
spread
wish
out.
people back to life, for example, or wish for immortality, or
Okay.
depending on how strong the Dragon Balls are, then like you got the Super Dragon Balls,
Oh,
which
I didn't know that.
grant you more powerful wishes and so forth. But yeah, and then they spread out. They kind
Okay.
of.
So there was an early episode of or like young Goku or something, and he's trying to track down all the Dragon Balls.
Yeah, right.
What did he wish for? Did he ever track them down?
Well, it depends on what era.
Oh, snap.
So
Okay.
there's several times when the dragon comes, but and I think the general rule is like you have to wait a year to reuse them, so you can't just like keep finding
Oh,
them
yeah,
and
and
then
just run
keep
it
using
back.
them over and over again and again. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So here's another really important one. Are pumpkin spice lattes, Target, Taylor Swift, and Visco girls, are they properly basic?
Yeah. So I had no idea. Like when I was doing my PhD, man, I was so away from pop culture. Like
Mm,
uh, I was not in. Right, I was just like I trapped myself in a flat, being a dad, and like just working on my PhD for 3 years.
yeah.
And then like I came to Houston, started teaching, and started like getting back to becoming a normal human being. And I started realizing people were using this word basic in a really weird way, and I was
Yeah.
like, what is this? What do you mean by basic, right? And then I told them that my gamer tag is properly basic, and they all started laughing at me.
That's fantastic. Okay, how about Recess or Rugrats?
Rugrats. I had a giant Tommy Pickles stuffed animal that I remember I got for Easter once, and I watched a lot of the episodes, and I remember going
Okay.
to the movies when Rugrats came to theaters.
Yeah. So that
Dope
actually
times.
that's a sociological question because I would pick Recess because I didn't have cable growing up. So we can
Hmm.
tell who had cable and who didn't have cable here. How
I
about
did
Crash?
like Recess.
Yeah. Recess was gold. Crash Bandicoot or Spyro the Dragon?
So I played both on my
Yeah.
PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
But I will probably have to go with Crash Bandicoot
Yeah.
because he looked like a dog, and I was always a big fan of dogs. That's
Okay.
probably literally the reason why I preferred it.
Crash is sweet. How about a Ring Pop or Pop Rocks?
Ring pop for sure.
Yeah.
I don't want things popping in my mouth, and I want to. Yeah, it's just yeah.
Oh, okay. Halo or Call of Duty?
Definitely now I would say Call of Duty. That's my
Okay.
favorite video game genre. That's
Okay.
like if I'm not playing with my sons, I'm playing Call of Duty. But back then I was big when Halo 1 released. I was like, this
Yeah.
is the best thing in the whole world. So
I loved the like the scenes. I love when the aliens like Arbiter. It's so epic. I love that
that
stuff.
final scene in Halo where it's like it's got the like monks chanting sort of music, it's like this crazy gaudy music,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
like really dark and all apocalyptic. It's just nothing
Cool.
beats being 12 and playing that.
That's right. How about Jordan or Bron?
Neither, but if I have
Neither?
to pick,
Yeah.
yeah. If I have to pick, though, I'm going with Jordan.
All right. Nice. I can dig that.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I
yeah,
I'm as you know, I cheer for the Rockets
that's
and
right.
Texas teams in general. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, a couple more serious ones, more actually serious ones. I know I ruined that now. Everyone has a defeater for trusting me now. But so Frank Jackson has this article about what Mary didn't know, and Mary's this color theorist who knows everything about color except that she lives in a black and white locked room, and they probably paint her skin black and white too. It's terrible. Then she walks out and she learns something about colors because she has these qualia experience, what it's like to experience red. This is really interesting for me because I'm trying to be at this nexus of theology and philosophy, much like you are. Does God know what it's like to eat a Chicago style hot dog?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So, I'm a classical theist, right? And so I think God is identical to his knowledge. And I think that God for example, doesn't know certain experiences in an extremely direct sense. Like he doesn't know what it's like to sin in one sense. There's another sense where I think he can know what it's like to sin, right? So, for example, like I think Ryan Mullins gives this in his recent book on God and emotions. Imagine that there's like imagine there's this person who doesn't experience pain, but nonetheless, maybe this alien race can invent some sort of device where it allows them to like simulate what it would be like to feel pain or something like that.
Yeah.
And so maybe God could have knowledge of what it's like to sin in this sense, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe God can know what it's like to eat, did you say Chicago style hot dog or something?
Yeah, that's right. This is the best. No ketchup. Yeah.
Like in essence, of course, if the knowledge ultimately entails weakness from God,
right?
Passivity, on my view.
Yeah, change.
Then
right?
Change. Yeah. Then I wouldn't want him to have that knowledge, and I'd be fine with saying that God doesn't have that sort of experiential knowledge.
He's limited by his perfection. If you exactly. he can't become less. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Same thing for sinning, but nonetheless, I think that there is a way where he can know what it's like, in the same way that this alien race knows. So I think there's probably a distinction between the two.
Yeah.
But I think God probably could only have one of those. So that's my view. I'm not a metaphysician, but
right. Yeah. No, that's great. View. Yeah, that's really great. Okay, and then just wanted to finish up here. So Plantinga's epistemology, is it a naturalized epistemology?
Yes. Right. Okay. So naturalized epistemology is like kind of getting away from the deontology. So if you think about Descartes, right, it's all about deontology, and Locke, all about deontology. And there's sort of an emphasis away from deontology and sort of emphasizing science and what science can tell us what we know, right? And so if you think about how I've appealed to cognitive science and talked about our brains being kind of like computers and that sort of thing, right? So science plays like a big role in our epistemology. And so if what you mean by naturalized epistemology is something like, well, it's a move away from deontology and a move to emphasize science and what it helps inform our epistemology, then I would say, yes, it is a naturalized epistemology. But Plantinga's epistemology is a special type of naturalized epistemology because it's a naturalized epistemology that can only make sense of if we invoke supernaturalism.
Yes.
So
that's what's so huge, man. I love that. And then also, as an extra just kick to all the naturalists, he develops this evolutionary argument against naturalism. For anyone who wants to hold that view but still be a naturalist, well, no, you don't get to have that. I'm kicking you out with this argument, which is.
And I think Tom Crisp has developed the best version of that.
Okay.
And Eric Baldwin and I try to take Tom Crisp's version and make it a self-defeat sort of argument, as Plantinga's original EWAN was intended to do.
Yeah.
But Tom Crisp and the Blackwell Companion Naturalism basically just applies it to metaphysical beliefs, or like beliefs that require like high-level abduction. So high-level science and metaphysical beliefs.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to get into that more. Jim Slagle is a guy who has written. Are you familiar with his work at all?
Yeah.
I love this guy. He just wrote it's called Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, I think. So it's a whole book on that, and he sent me the preprint or whatever, so I got to read that and get into it more.
Nice.
But dude, I'd love to have you on to talk about that a little bit more sometime. Would
you? Yeah. Of course.
That'd be fantastic.
You can ask me more pop culture questions.
Yes, dude. I love it. Now that you're done with your PhD, you can avoid calling yourself basic in a new way or something.
Right, exactly.
Well, awesome, man. Thanks again for coming on for all your time here.
All right, man. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So this has been Parker's Pensies. We could talk about this more, and hopefully someday we will. But for now, it's going to have to do it. And as always, all glory to God.